Welcome to episode 31 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men the Animated Series weekly recap podcast. I'm Rod, and it's been a while.
It has. And I'm JC, and today my hair actually has a little bit of like a wisp in front of it. It looks a little bit like Morph from the early animated series episodes right now. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single episode of the original 1992 X-Men, the animated series, in their original intended script order, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which is coming to Disney Plus in fall of 2023. That's the first time we actually have that, because this is our first episode we've recorded since that announcement at Comic-Con.
We mention this every episode, but we do these in batches. And so because of how crazy con season was, we recorded a whole bunch. Everything you've heard to this point has been before convention season. And now this is what, like a 1 or 2 week, 2 weeks after Comic-Con.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a whole slew of things to talk about, among other crazy announcements, but we'll get into all that stuff.
Yep. And for those of you who are wondering how we determine the order of these episodes, we utilize a list from previously on X-Men, the making of an animated series by your lead showrunner, Eric Lewald, along with his wife, Julia, which I got to meet them at Comic-Con, which was fantastic. We were actually talking about the Purple Man episode because I had told them that had just aired for us right before San Diego Comic-Con. And, you know, they were talking about some of the difficulties with the animation on that one. And, you know, the original one that had came back was just not the quality that it needed to be. But they also told me they had just found out that day that Disney is actually going to fix the order in Disney Plus and put it into script order. I don't know if that has happened by the time this episode airs, but if it hasn't, know it's coming, and I'm very happy because we could stop saying original intended script order.
Yeah, that's awesome. We probably still will because there's so many other places, there's so many other orders.
That's true. IMDb needs to fix it, you know, etc. But yeah.
Well, I think it's funny too because for various YouTube projects, I've been talking to Eric and Julia like online and stuff, and obviously like a little thing that happened in 2020 put a kink into those projects.
Also, I like that I got to meet them before you did, and you've actually been talking to them.
And that's what I was saying. Is like I got to talk to him for a while, and then John like texted me. He's like, I got to meet them today. I was like, how did you meet them? When I've been texting them for like 3 years.
Because Rod doesn't go to Comic-Con.
No, it's too. It's anxiety. It's like a convention for anxiety for me.
I mean, fair, but it was a great convention. I got to meet Larry Houston. I got to meet
a lot of people.
Yeah, I got to meet Dan Wiesermeyer, who did a lot of the original storyboards. He also did the artwork for the Hasbro VHS style figure. So the Wolverine one that's downstairs has his autograph on it and stuff.
You've seen pictures of that from the one that John got me. And also, speaking of John, is that who did these illustrations? Yeah,
the infamous photo of Scott and Jean. That was
So I have one now. Should I put a hole in it?
I mean, I hope you
don't. and this was the cool one for me. It was like there's a drawing of Storm, my queen, which is amazing. So thank you, John. That was amazing.
Yeah, totally. What's funny was I posted it on Instagram without Rod knowing that was intended for him because the signature is just small on the Instagram photo. And he's like, oh, it's my girl. And I said nothing in response about it.
Yeah, he's great at surprises. It was also, that's probably going to get framed. My house. I love Storm. Anyway, so some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that came out 28 years ago. There will be some spoilers. If you don't want to spoil it for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, come back. We'll do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes we haven't covered yet. We're currently not sponsored or affiliated with Disney or Disney Plus in any way.
You sound so disappointed now saying that. Like, we originally put this as just like disclaimer, and now every time you say it, I feel like you're slightly more dead inside.
Yeah, it could be worse. We could be sponsored by HBO Max.
No, we can't. We literally can't. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. Recently on Instagram, we threw up a post for who would you like us to collaborate with? We met a bunch of awesome people from the X-Men community. Shout out to all those people. And we're going to probably do, I guess now, instead of calling it collabs like we're used to on YouTube, they call it crossovers because of comic book.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're going to be doing some collab/crossovers with more members of this community. And finally, as Rod alluded to, we record these episodes in batches. So if we're reacting to news and we're late about it, like talking about Comic-Con, which I think by the time that this goes live will be a full month prior, that's why.
So I think the only thing that's like, well, not the only thing, but the biggest bombshell that dropped on the X-Men Marvel community, and this is kind of a spoiler, but also this is like 2 months since the series ended. So I guess if you haven't watched Miss Marvel by now and you don't want things spoiled for you, skip the next 1 minute, 15 seconds. So obviously we got the drop at the end of the last episode of Miss Marvel where she's a mutant and the X-Men theme song played. So I don't
and
know if
it's
that was
specifically credited as X-Men 97
Seven.
in the same way that it was in Multiverse of Magnus.
Yeah, and if you saw, and I'll post this on one of the on Cyclops' Wait For Me social media too, but on my personal social medias, I have a reaction from Ron Wasserman. Got to see it. It's the huge bombshell. Like we have X-Men technically. Well, we have mutants, but the X-Men theme song was what was the crazy part. So it's like I don't know what that implies or not, and I actually didn't mean to make this a told you so. I actually texted John on his birthday. He's like, hey, on your birthday, Miss Marvel got announced as the first mutant in the MCU. And then a week later, I was editing the last episode in our last batch where John says there's no way Miss Marvel's going to be a mutant.
I didn't think she would. I legitimately didn't.
But that wasn't what I meant. But also, I think this was a case where my ignorance paid off because I didn't know that she wasn't.
And also, to be fair, I don't remember most of what we're talking about, so...
I didn't until I heard it again. Anyway, it's a kind of a cool thing. The creator of Miss Marvel said she was always intended to be a mutant.
Right.
It's just because of the political... Look up Ike Perlmutter if you want to hear that whole drama. It's just really cool. I mean, I geeked out. Everyone lost their collective shit who saw that moment, Anyway, now on to the show. Today we're going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 14, titled The Dark Phoenix Part 1 Dazzled. That's a mouthful. And
it's literally what it shows up as. Like I copy and pasted that. That is what it is.
It aired on November 12th, 1994 and currently sits at a 7.8 star rating on IMDb. This was a good episode. I guess that goes without saying. This is a really kind of classic storyline.
Yeah. I mean, it was the foundation of a great multi-parter. One thing that we talked about as we were prepping for this is they did an amazing job of making these have very definitive endpoints from an episode perspective, whereas sometimes the other multi-part episodes were very much just like, we ran out of time, there's a to be continued. This one was like, there are two that are obviously interconnected and have to flow right into the other, but they felt like full episodes regardless.
Yeah, there was thematic arcs. Yeah. I know film. Arcs to each episode on top of the whole 4-part series. But I think you might have even mentioned during our coverage of the regular Phoenix saga that most people probably think of Dark Phoenix saga. And now that I've rewatched it, that's true. I think a lot of my memories from the Phoenix epicness and stuff came from this part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of really great moments in the Phoenix saga episodes, but the ones that are the most memorable because they're kind of the more traumatic episodes definitely came from this. It's also a tighter time frame too. The amount of time that actually happens in character for these people during this whole experience is super truncated.
It's like a day or two, right?
It's like from the start of this episode, which we're going to get into in a second, we promise, to the end of it is probably 48 hours, if that.
Yeah, because there's 2 nights, we know.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. All right, well, so it starts off with this random satellite that zooms into Muir Island.
Right, and maybe I'll check the DVDs at some point, but at least on Disney Plus, there is a satellite that has appeared at the beginning of multiple episodes. I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, and it's so quick. It doesn't linger on
it. It feels like an accident.
So it zooms into Muir Island, which we know is in Scotland because bagpipe music. And we've heard mention of Jean being alive, but this is the first time since Phoenix Saga that we've seen Jean is alive.
Right.
Moira is speaking to her over a microphone speaker thing because Jean's in a containment unit.
Intercom?
Yeah, that thing. And basically, I don't know if there's a better word for it. She's kind of trying to trigger her. I mean, she's trying to get her to remember things, but...
Yeah, so the big piece that's missing for everybody outside of the Phoenix itself is what happened when she flew into the sun. Because the assumption would have been, it doesn't matter how powerful an entity you are, you fly into the heart of a sun, how are you getting out?
Yeah, and Jean lets out this god-awful scream that puts Rogue to shame. Oh my god, that was screechy. So shout out to whatever voice actor did that. That was a feat. Anyway, Xavier is trying to get Phoenix to leave Jean's body, but Phoenix says she enjoys the sensations of the new emotions and things that this human body gives her, and gives out an evil villain laugh. Moira says that the psychoneural therapy, which I'm gonna guess is not a real thing, or maybe it is if you know it is.
We should really look stuff up once in a while. We do a good job of I will go back and see references to the comic books and things like that, but the second it becomes anything scientific, we forget we have access to the internet.
Right? Yeah.
We're the worst.
Anyway, so she says that they should take her home, which I almost forgot to mention. So when she does that awful scream, she like blows up that containment unit she's in.
Here's the thing. I don't believe it's a full-fledged containment unit.
Yeah.
I think it's supposed to like help her and amplify her mind and things like that. So I don't think it's like containment like how they lock Loki up in Avengers kind of scenario. But yeah, she destroys the shit out of the probably pretty expensive equipment.
But it's definitely supposed to be a barrier between like Xavier and Moira and her.
I mean, there's barriers in the danger room that, like, I'm sure if somebody actually went loose, they could actually like break through those. Like, that's not going to stop Wolverine from clawing through it kind of scenario.
Yeah.
But we digress.
I'm not a scientist, but it just didn't seem like the smartest thing to be like, oh, she blew this place up. You should take her home.
Counterpoint. She blew it up because they were trying to probe her mind.
Yeah.
So maybe don't try to probe the mind of giant space bird entity.
Yeah. So Jean, her mind kind of subconsciously like calls to Scott for help. And then that echo takes us to New York. And even before we see her on screen, I recognize this is going to be a scene with Dazzler because we hear like pop music and a voice and a nightclub.
You hear like 90s poppy music. The episode is called Dazzled too, so I'm sure that played a little bit of a hint for you. But what was interesting is the character design for Dazzler is slightly different as opposed to the Dazzler cameo that happened in the Mojo Vision episode.
Oh yeah,
because the Mojo Vision episode is the design of Dazzler from the Konami arcade cabinet. This one was updated a little bit, for lack of a better term.
She's brunette, and was she brunette in Mojo Vision? I can't remember.
She was like a lighter brunette, but she's a darker one.
Yeah, and she doesn't have like the bodysuit and everything.
Yeah, she went a little more into like the leather, Yeah.
And she's singing a song, and the lyrics were "Caught myself on fire, don't know what to do, I feel my body heat," and it's like the end of the song. This sounds like a fully fleshed out song, just the way they presented it.
It could absolutely be a song. We can't find anything about it online. So where I say we don't research certain stuff, we go total like hardcore tunnel vision on other shit and don't find anything about it.
So I knew, it's funny, this moment, I knew that the music stuff would kind of fall back on me, so I actually went.
Yeah, I didn't even look for it. I was like, I have to figure out all the Hellfire Club stuff and things like that. Rod can deal with music.
So I looked up all like the sources that most people have, couldn't find anything on it. Everybody wonders where the song's from. It's not based on anything that I know of. If you happen to know it, I guess leave a comment. Some people had theories, but none of it's actual song. And then I went into some records that if you're like in music or a songwriter, you can look up like publishing records. Outside of having the actual title or whoever actually sang it, I couldn't find a record of it, even in like, because there's other databases you can look up where music and shows are and stuff, and X-Men has nothing listed for it. I did text.
That's the most on-brand shit I've ever heard for Saban.
Yeah. And speaking of, I did text Ron. I was like, hey, did you write this song? No biggie if not. Or, do you know what happened there and the thing? And we always time these perfectly. So I know for a fact he's on a family vacation right now. So he's not responding, but he also knows for me it's like it's not urgent. So I haven't heard back yet. But if he updates with anything.
So just for clarity, what are the inappropriate times because of this show you have bothered Ron Wasserman?
His son's graduation.
And now on a family vacation.
Yeah. I'm going to guess, just based on the other times I've had questions for him, is that if it wasn't him, it was probably somebody else in the production. And since he's not like the producer, so whoever's putting it together, he doesn't know exactly the origins of it. And knowing Saban, it was probably someone that'll never be credited. I actually, just before we recorded, went back and checked the credits for this episode. No one specific is listed. There's just a general music editing supervision in charge of music crew and stuff. So it could have been anything. But I don't know. If anybody knows anything about the song is interesting, let us know, because I've seen a lot of people discussing online, like, where is this? Because this could be like a cool Easter egg moment or something,
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, Rod has done some like weird music discovery stuff in the past, like including finding out there are two people who claimed to have done the Mortal Kombat yell and stuff like that. So it's not always tied to Cyclops is waiting for me, but you do find some weird music stuff going on. So.
Yeah, it's there's more drama than I ever anticipated. So anyway, that moment gets interrupted when Scott hears Jean in his head. So he starts to leave. Gambit tries to stop him. He's like, just enjoy your night, man. And Scott says, you can go ahead and stay. I'm going to leave. So Scott.
Which is a little shocking to me, only because I feel like if there is anybody who's going to try to sleep with Dazzler, it's going to be Gambit.
Right.
And he doesn't want the potential, like, wet blanket cock block of Cyclops with him.
So a little bit out of character. Something's wrong. He's like, are you okay, man?
Yeah.
And so as Scott's leaving, the Hellfire Club, we'll go back and talk about this later. The Hellfire Club is kidnapping Dazzler.
Well, at the time, we don't know who it is. We see a dude in his yellow, 18th century outfit. And you called them putties, which I thought was really appropriate. But they are, just faceless goons that have a mask that prevents any sort of identification to them. It's essentially just, it looks like not a modeling dummy, but those little figurines that artists use to base character motion and body anatomy off of, kind of thing.
Yeah, they're just generic henchmen.
I don't know what those are called. I'm not going to look it up.
I don't know either. I used to have one just because aesthetic.
Because you live in Los Angeles?
Well, this is before Los Angeles, but just because, you're like in your 30s, you're like something in my apartment.
So we see this group coming at Dazzler, trying to take her out of the club. And Cyclops obviously sees this and goes for the save, because whether or not she was a mutant, he's not going to stand by and let a woman get abducted.
The dude in the yellow outfit like rips his sleeve off, because that's what you do when you want to reveal you have a metal arm.
Yes. There were very few moments in this episode that I questioned. I don't think you want to give away that that's like your thing. Like, I could see if like Cyclops shot him in the arm and it's like, oh, there's metal underneath your poofy sleeve. But it was like, why don't... I mean, here's the thing. We find out that this is Donald Pierce, who's a member of the Hellfire Club / Inner Circle. We'll get into that in a second. And he is a pompous asshole. Yeah. So maybe he thought it was going to be an intimidation moment and it just backfired on him.
That makes sense, yeah. Because he uses that arm and reaches into a car and grabs an engine. Yeah. So part of me wants to say that, like, because of how dumb these guys are in the not Hellfire Club, is that he didn't want to like mess up his outfit reaching into the car, so he rips it off. I don't know what the logic is.
That logic does not track for me.
It doesn't track for normal people, but we're talking about like a Victorian meathead with a cyborg arm. So anyway, he rips the car engine out, throws it at Scott. If we didn't get a sense already, it's solidified now. Dazzler has powers and she uses her dazzling power. Is it light?
It's hard light.
Hard light. Oh. Coming back to Ms. Marvel.
Different.
Different hard light. Yep. And saves...
Hers normally requires sound to activate it. That's why she's a musician. Music.
And saves Scott not only from the engine, but also from being clubbed over the head with a light pole.
Was it a light pole or was it a stop sign? It was like it was a street sign
pole. Street sign, yeah. 90s, man. Remember? We don't have stoplights anymore.
Yes, we do. I'm kidding. Nothing about that has to do with the 90s, Rod.
It's like, in my mind, I was going to let it go, but in my mind, it tracked of like the freestanding pole stoplights,
Those still exist.
Not in LA.
Anyway, keep going.
They probably do. I don't know. I just don't pay attention. So Pierce runs off and with the putty patrol, and Dazzler kind of flirts with Scott, and she reveals that the car that got the engine ripped out was her car, so she doesn't have a ride home, or at least that's what she says. Scott is flirting back, and I wouldn't be so certain about it, except we've never seen Scott get this close at all.
I don't know if he was actually flirting, to be fair. I think he's so awkward that he unintentionally said things that could be misconstrued as flirting.
I guess
because it's like that awkward cuteness vibe when it's really just he's that awkward.
Yeah, at the very least, I sense that like he's like, let's see where this goes.
And this is where I will respectfully disagree with you.
Yeah.
Now that Jean is back, he's not flirting with anybody intentional. I think he's that clueless.
See, I would think that I can believe the clueless part. Mainly, so the reason I was thinking he was flirting is because what we're going to talk about as the episode goes on with Dazzler, because it's just like, man, Jean's got a point. We'll get back to that. So at the mansion, we find Wolverine is looking for salami, which is a very vital story point.
He was very into the salami.
He's trying to make a sandwich. It's kind of funny because I'm like, you know what? I can't even make fun of it, because when I'm looking for stuff in my fridge, I do the same thing. I just talk out loud, even though there's like no one else there. I don't have roommates, so it's just like me and possibly my cat if she's listening to me talk. Anyway, he's making the sandwich. He finds the salami. Right about then. All right, there's a cool moment where he takes his claws and slices the salami, which is totally what you would do if you had, claws.
I do love with Wolverine, you do get the cartoon logic of the distance between his claws changes depending on the needs of the story beat or the moment. Because when he does the slice, they come out like Canadian bacon thickness.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually look at the distance between them on his hands, there's like an inch in between them.
It'd be like a burger patty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's fun. I'm not talking shit on that. I legit think that's fun, but it's just like he's making, those are thin cut. They are not like Ralph's like super thin cut, like sandwich cold cut style, but they're pretty thin.
Yeah, but he's making like a salami sandwich, literally. Yes. And as Scott walks in, he's a little beat up.
Also, I just want to point out, thank God we are separating this into 4 separate episodes.
You're right.
Because we're on the top third of my notes right now, and we've been going for a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Scott comes back with his shirt ripped from the fight, and Wolverine was like, oh, so you had some fun without me?
I love that. That's like a really bro moment. He's like, oh, good job, dude.
Yeah, I'm actually proud of you. Seems like you grew a pair.
So this is one of the things where either you see it like John does, where he's just clueless, or you see it as I do. He's like, he's a little bit flirty, but he's like, so I met this woman tonight. And Logan's like, stop that.
See, and for me, it was, I met this woman tonight, and I'm interested because she's a mutant, and it's another mutant that isn't in our crew yet, and there aren't that many of them. That's true. That was my interpretation.
That is true. That's something I thought about for the not Hellfire Club, but the X-Men makes sense too, is that there's not a lot of female mutants in this world.
I mean,
so far.
There are not a ton of mutants in this world at this point. Like there's a lot of poor, shitty powered mutants. Like, you know, we get the ones who've been targeted by the Friends of Humanity. You get the ones who can't pass above the streets, like that are in the Morlocks. But it's like, well, this woman was kind of strong enough to save my ass, so maybe she's somebody we should talk to.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so the reason Logan stops him is because he's like, oh, do my eyes deceive me? And Jean walks in.
She seems drugged out of her skull. Like, I just want to put, you know, Charles is like, yep, here she is. She probably needs to sleep because of like the travel and the jet lag. Any other interpretation of that is they put her on some major meds right now.
Which makes sense if you flew into the sun and survived.
You don't want them to go fucking nuclear at this point, so like, let's drug this person just to be safe.
Well, that's what I mean though. Like, if you have someone that's like that unhinged, you're like, let's just, while we're on a moving flying vehicle, mitigate that. And so Scott gets to see her for like 0.5 seconds before Xavier's like, she's tired, she should go to sleep, and asks Storm to take Jean back upstairs. Xavier starts to try to explain how like the therapy wasn't working, so they're going to try to continue at the mansion, and Scott just like loses it. And he's like, what's the point? Nothing's going to help.
Right. And I think the only thing that kind of shocked me about this is that Scott didn't go over to Muir Island to be with them during the treatment process, unless it was like literally like, we don't know how long this is going to take. We need you to be the leader and basically take over for Xavier in the States.
Yeah.
Well, he's with Jean over there. But I was a little surprised that, you know, they allude they've been going at this for a while when they're on Muir Island. So I was shocked that Scott hadn't been there, you know?
Yeah. I guess to your point, yeah, it makes sense. Both of us can't be over in Muir Island at the same time and expect the world to like remain peaceful.
Yeah, exactly.
While we're there. So Scott, you know, he's just upset because he says that Jean seems distant. So,
and the treatment feels hopeless.
That makes me feel like Scott was over there at least at some point. Or something. Fair. Or maybe even when I forget if the animation showed it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was there when they actually found her.
He was in the Blackbird and Rogue hopped out.
Yeah, grabbed her.
Which we're jumping forward slightly, but yeah.
It's like, there's something off about her. So Xavier says, well, Jean needs some strength from you, Scott, because they have like a psychic rapport and a connection and stuff. And so that's exactly why they sent her away. And then we cut over to... I was excited because I saw some of the things. I was like, oh, Hellfire Club. And then it pans over a label that says The Circle Club. I was like, lame.
Okay. So we got some moments with regard to the Hellfire Club. So Hellfire Club was a legitimate group and I say legitimate as in actually existed, not actually being legitimate, like, you know, real business. And that's why it says 1729. Because it was 18th century that the Hellfire Club was actually founded. Okay. So there is a group within the Hellfire Club, which was known as the Inner Circle. Okay. And this is all like IRL lore. This is not specific to the X-Men. So the Inner Circle were essentially the elites from within the Hellfire Club.
So kind of like an Illuminati, Freemasons kind of thing.
I don't want to say yes, because I don't know enough about what the things that they did were, but it's kind of like within the Hellfire Club, which is the larger organization, the Inner Circle were the ones who pulled the strings. So if you look at this party where we're going to see the inside of the Circle Club later. The inner circle is like actually doing the real wheelings and dealings, while other people are like having a party and getting, fancy food and wines and stuff like that. So
that's so funny. Yeah.
So it is an existing organization. Obviously, looking at, the book that we reference constantly, it was because of the name that they literally couldn't have something called Hellfire in a children's cartoon.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't know that it was a real organization before, so the having the real tie would probably be kind of like a no-no, right? And
No. It was more so because of Hellfire.
Oh, okay.
is the actual issue,
which most comic and Marvel fans knew about then or before. Now, current day, if you didn't know it before, you know it from Stranger Things.
Right. And a couple of weeks ago when that aired, and I started seeing Hellfire Club all over the place, and I, being the fan that I am of the X-Men, like, this story was published in 1980. So I wonder if whether or not they will acknowledge it in the show Stranger Things, were the kids actually inspired by the name Hellfire Club from the comics?
Probably. They never...
I know they don't call it out point blank, but I feel like that unless there is an origin, because I haven't watched Stranger Things, that they do say where it came from, I wonder if that was where they got it from.
A lot of things like that, they just kind of leave to your imagination, but you know where it came from, because they can't specifically say in Stranger Things like, we love the X-Men necessarily. I'm guessing Hellfire Club
I'm guessing there's also a little bit of the bitterness of like Marvel just in general with the Netflix executives.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things like that though. I mean, there's some stuff they directly reference, you can tell they got clearances for, but this one is like one of those things where everybody's like, oh, they definitely got it from the X-Men comics, because the Hellfire Club in Stranger Things, this is not really a spoiler. It's basically just it's a D&D club.
Right.
And that's what they named their club. And so I think it's just kind of a given that they were into the X-Men comics, and just like it was a given, they in season 4 they never referenced the Satanic Panic, but anyone that lived through the 90s knows exactly what that looked like. So when you're watching season 4 of Stranger Things, like oh, we're dealing with the Satanic Panic.
Well, Satanic Panic was 80s, not 90s.
Oh, that's right. Sorry,
right.
80s.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna leave that in. This is on brand for me. 80s. Anyway, I was born in 82, so I remember the tail end of that when I was a kid. So I'm. All that to say, it's heavily... I really think that the Stranger Things kids were X-Men fans, and that's why they named it Hellfire Club. But I think it's funny how Circle Club got its name, like, working inside out. They're like, oh, well, there is a group called the Inner Circle, so let's take the Inner Circle. And what's outside the Inner Circle? The Circle.
The club, Rod. The club.
The Circle Club.
Yes.
Anyway, in this discussion in the Inner Circle part of the Circle Club...
No, you nailed it. I'm sorry. Keep going. We meet some characters.
Yeah, we meet some characters. I wasn't familiar with these characters, but I figure out their names from this. So the guy with the metal arm was Pierce. I don't think he said Donald, but you said it was Donald.
I know. Pierce. I just know the character's name is Donald.
The other dude that's in the green is Shaw.
Sebastian Shaw.
And then there's a guy that's a little bit heavier set, and he's drinking, and he's kind of egging everybody else on. His name is Leland, and I thought at the time he had electrical powers because he like kind of zapped something.
Henry Leland, just so you know.
Henry Leland.
Yep,
okay.
That was not said in the show. Yeah. That's again just Leland actually recently appeared in the comics, and he is the Krakoan representative to the United Nations.
Oh, okay, interesting.
No.
But you were telling me that off mic that his powers aren't electrical; they're density.
Right. So let's actually get into that. So there is an interaction between Shaw and Pierce, where Pierce has failed to bring Dazzler back, and Shaw essentially was like, "Well, were you recruiting Dazzler for the Circle, or were you recruiting her for yourself?"
Yeah.
Which that's one of those things that years later, it's like, "Oh, that's creepy, dude." Yeah. It's like, ooh, like,
but it's on brand for these three dudes. Once you hear them talk more,
right. And then Pierce, he smacks Leland's crystal glass out of his hand. And Leland, describe what you thought happened.
Oh, I thought zapped Pierce because it like electricity came out of his hand.
Right. So you got the vibe it was electric powers. But if you look and see how the response to those powers are, it's actually density. So you look at somebody like Blob. Blob is fat because he's dense. He's not dense because he's fat. So he controls density within himself. Leland is a different scenario where he is controlling density of other things as his mutant power. And we'll go deeper into that in another use of his power in the episode. But yeah, essentially he can just make things stupid heavy. So that's why when you thought it was an electrical zap and it was his arm failing, it was, his arm all of a sudden weighs 800 pounds.
Heavy. Yeah. And then they were like, we're going to bill you for that crystal.
Which I did appreciate because it was so petty and bitchy. I was like, yeah, I would do that to somebody.
And all these guys, this is presumably in current times, which is like the 90s.
This was in the 90s, absolutely.
But they're all like just pretending it's like Victorian era because they're wearing like the wigs and the clothes and stuff. I guess you said like 18th.
Yeah, century, it is 18th century. I mean, the traditions of the Hellfire Club and the inner circle within it was very much like, any of these secret societies, like even if you look at like the Skulls who were infamous around like Yale University and stuff, they would still do their original rituals of I'm wearing these creepy robes and crap like that. So this is a little more high society rather than like ritual.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's like Soho House.
It's halfway between Soho House and Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh,
that's what I said. That's halfway.
Yeah, that got dark. Anyway, so in the middle of this like literally pointless argument between all these powerful men.
Oh, by the way, before we move on, one thing that is not fully addressed within the show but is within the comics is there are certain titles associated to chess pieces within the inner circle. Mm-hmm. So in the comics, you have Jaw, who is technically the Black King.
Okay.
You have Leland, who is the Black Bishop, and then Pierce is the White Bishop.
I knew there were two bishops. I didn't know they were designated different ones.
Yeah, it's like a chessboard. So you literally have the counterparts to each other, where you have
on each side.
Right. So one of the people who pops in is actually Emma Frost, who is also the White Queen.
Oh, I didn't put that together.
Yeah, that's why Emma is known as the White Queen, because of the time that she spent as a member of the Hellfire Club.
So she was the one I actually recognized when she walked in, and we'd seen her as a cameo in one other episode a long time ago.
It was one of the Phoenix Saga episodes because of the psychic blast that essentially put Jean on Emma's radar.
Yeah. And so I was excited to see her because, virtually every instance of her, even in some of the worst X-Men representations and stuff in film and media and stuff, I still loved her character. It's like a really interesting.
I felt like they did her dirty in the reboot. So there was a lot of stuff with X-Men New Class that I did really enjoy. Mm-hmm. She felt like a throwaway character, unfortunately. I
get what you mean. Yeah, she wasn't as, like big or whatever.
She just didn't matter in the episodes. Yeah. In the movies.
Yeah. And so she walks in. At the time, I wasn't familiar with who brought her in, but we'll get into that pretty soon.
Yep. So it's Emma and Jason Wingard.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Emma senses that there's the Phoenix, and she's like, we should give up on Dazzled or whoever she is. The Phoenix is out there, and we need to recruit her instead. And then she basically recaps the whole Phoenix saga, and we see a lot of footage just from the original Phoenix saga.
Which I think is helpful, just context of like, if Shaw is the king right now and needs to know, why should I care about recruiting this person? Mm-hmm. And you're rejecting somebody who beat up one of your people, like literally beat up one of your bishops. Why do we want the person instead of the one who beat up our bishop?
Yeah. And in the middle of recapping the Phoenix saga, Emma reveals that when the Phoenix flew into the sun, she didn't perish, but
dropped off the crystal, essentially.
Yeah, and survived. And then she re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. She crashed onto shore. It shows what looks like Mirror Island, but they don't exactly say.
It could be anywhere kind of scenario.
Yeah. And Xavier finds her.
Yeah, so you have in the Blackbird, it was Professor X, Wolverine, Rogue, and Cyclops. They land, and Rogue jumps out of the ship and snags her.
Mm-hmm. Leland's like, what is your source of your information? And
that was a hell of an impression, Rod.
Yeah. And she says, well, it was Xavier's computer, which we know is Cerebro.
It makes sense that she wouldn't know that name.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And then my note was like, oh, we're still recapping. So we see more flashback footage. Leland is basically questioning, like, how could you get in there? And
she says that Xavier has been mentally taxed, and then you get those flashbacks of some of the Lilandra moments and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so she was able to breach the cybersecurity basically at that point. And this is another 90s thing, like cyber attack, cybersecurity stuff. That was like a really big, like it was kind of new to us.
You also have a mental, like, you have a telepath doing computer hacking, which that's a new trope.
That's awesome.
That is cyberpunk before cyberpunk.
Yeah. And then in my notes, this is where I learned that his name is Weingard, and he suggests that they need to attack her mind because she's physically too powerful to try to like contain.
Right.
So they need to like kind of puppet her.
Yeah, and I for what it's worth, Weingard is also known as Mastermind in the comics.
Oh, that name sounds familiar.
And I think it probably sounds familiar to you because, one, all the X-Men trading cards from when we grew up, but Weingard/Mastermind was one of the original Brotherhood of Evil Mutants that Magneto controlled in the comics as well. And I believe I brought that up on a previous episode when we were comparing the roster of Brotherhood from comics compared to the show.
Yeah.
Mystique not being original Brotherhood, but Blob and Avalanche and those guys being there.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So it kind of wraps up there at the mansion, at the X mansion. Xavier is
the less pompous mansion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, now we're dealing with two different rich people.
Rich white people.
Right, yeah. That's the theme of this episode, isn't it? And Xavier is kind of, I don't want to say interrogating, but talking to Phoenix.
I mean, at this point, it's like anything like this where it's the intervention style thing. It's therapy. It's not as invasive as the machine she was in previously.
Yeah, and asks Phoenix, like, why are you still here? What do you want? And Phoenix says basically like that she's experienced some new, exhilarating emotions and stuff.
It's hungering body. For those emotions.
Yeah, so she's hungering for this even more. Xavier is funny because as he's leaving, he's like, "Oh yeah, things are going to be fine." And he's like, turns around, he's like, "No."
Well, before he leaves, the power of the Phoenix shoots out of her eyes and her mouth. Don't forget that part.
Yeah.
He didn't just walk out because she gave like a vague answer. He's like, "Oh yeah."
And so Beast is like, "What did you see?" And Xavier said it wasn't necessarily what he saw, but what he felt. And it was that the Phoenix is becoming more and more dominant every day in Jean's body. So it's not a good sign. He doesn't really know what to do.
Yeah, it's refusing to leave. It's a mix of anger and excitement. And it's tied into the fact that the Phoenix is feeling a lot of these thing called emotions for the first time. Like the Phoenix previously was a being of energy, but the association to Jean is letting it experience things that it never had before.
Yeah. So back in the room, Jean / the Phoenix is getting ready to go to bed or turn in for the night. And
I don't think we have to say the slashes, right? I think I think we could just go with, just for clarity for those who are listening, if it's the voice is the Phoenix voice, we just say Phoenix, otherwise we say Jean.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just lost track because it flips back and forth so much.
Totally. Yeah. I think at this point it is Scott who is consoling Jean and is like, I'll be back, does his old like mushy, awkward, like my love type shit. It's like, yeah, I got to go to the club to meet up with that other mutant.
So this moment, and this is a nitpicky thing, it didn't make me dislike the show at all. And I don't even think that anybody should go into this misconsideration writing something like this. But it's funny when you go down the rabbit hole, especially like revisiting this, 28 years later. It's like, I get why he disclosed he's going to see Dazzler because he's dealing with a mind reader, literally.
Right. Hiding it would be bad. I agree with that.
But then on the flip side of that, she could just read his mind and know that he's not cheating on her. But that's not the point of the scene. In that moment, Phoenix like kind of snaps in, takes over, and is like, "You're gonna leave me for another woman?"
And then it quickly snaps back to Jean.
Yeah. And Jean's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that."
No, I would say the only thing I would question, and maybe it's just like, well, options are limited because Beast would stand out like a sore thumb in a nightclub and probably would also hate a nightclub. Let's be real. That is the opposite of his scene. Also, Wolverine is a dive bar guy.
Yeah.
So he's not going to go there. Jubilee can't go into a club because she's too young and is like, maybe I don't want to have Gambit go there.
I was going to say, Gambit might be banned at this point. We haven't heard back on that storyline just yet.
Gambit got booted out the night prior.
Yeah, we don't know what he pulled in that club after Cyclops left.
But plot device is what it is. Storm jumps in and says, "Oh, don't worry, I'll wait with her." And Scott takes off.
Yeah, and which that whole thing, I felt, I don't know, I guess this is part of the thing. They wanted to make her feel more at ease, but I was like, man, I would have had like a lot more planned regimen of like not letting this woman be alone between a person and Jean being in trauma and an uncontrollable force like the Phoenix. Either side of that, no matter how you take it, is like, probably should not be unsupervised.
But also at the same time, if you're under constant supervision, like that can't feel great either.
That's what I mean. Like, I guess there's, I don't know. Once again, over nitpicking.
That's literally what our show is.
Yeah.
So when Scott takes off and it's Jean starting to fall asleep, White Queen realizes that her mind is at ease and it's time to bring Wingard in.
That is so frightening. That was the most frightening part of the story to me, was that this woman was like telepathically like surveilling Jean. So she's like, she's asleep now. I'm like, ooh, it's a weird like peeper in the window kind of vibe, you know?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think that this show does a very good job of showcasing how strong Emma Frost is as a character. Emma, through all her ups and downs from character moments, Emma has done some messed up stuff in the comics, and you only get the glimpse of it here.
Yeah. And so she tells Weingart it's time, and she does, so John hasn't seen Stranger Things, but this has happened a little bit in Stranger Things where Eleven does piggybacking, and I would not be surprised if they based it off of like this White Queen stuff.
Right. And for those of you who are in the camp like me who haven't watched Stranger Things and seen what piggybacking is, essentially Emma Frost acts as an amplification of Jason's powers, where it is going to let him remotely affect Jean's mind because Emma is in it. So it kind of like transfers through. And, normally he would have to be in proximity of somebody to control his illusions.
Yeah. And so Jean she falls asleep and she wakes up in a nightmare. She's drowning near a pirate ship and Weingart rescues her. Jean senses that it's not the right time or place or even the world, but Weingart tells her just go to sleep.
So interesting part here, the way that this is portrayed in the comics is this is actually an experience of Lady Grey, who's one of Jean's ancestors, falling in love with one of Jason's ancestors.
Oh, that's so funny. It's a very...
It's very hard to convey in the briefness of the episode, but because the comics happened between issues number 129 and 138, you had a lot more time and exposition that you could get that out there.
It kind of gives me the vibe of like Assassin's Creed, like the animal stuff.
A little bit, yeah.
Where you're like living your ancestors' stories and stuff. That's really cool.
That's actually that's a really good way to explain it.
That gives this whole pirate thing a little bit more reason than just being an aesthetic they like.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things of if you're going to fit this massive story into 4 episodes, not issues, you have to do it in a briefer manner. And unfortunately, I don't think it adds enough that you had to fit it in. I think it's clean and understandable as is.
Yeah, it's cool. And so Jean wakes up and he's kind of indoctrinating.
Jean wakes up within the illusion.
Yeah, she wakes up within the illusion, still on the pirate ship, and Weingart is kind of gaslighting and indoctrinating her with like a new story, and she's confused enough that she doesn't know what pieces are real and what aren't. And
she says phrases like, "This is all wrong. This isn't my world." Weingart tells her, "Rest my Venus," which is like, such a creep. This dude has definitely not done this before.
Yeah. Then he went on to lead the Warner Brothers investors call. Anyway.
Way to timestamp this episode, Rod. My Comic-Con shit means nothing now. Right. He reminds her of what happened. I'm doing air quotes. She had stowed away on his ship that was set to sail to America. And that's when Jean is looking over the water and she remembers another life, and the phrasing she uses was remembering unusual people, and that's where you see like Wolverine's face in the water and such.
Yeah, and so she's basically describing all the X-Men, but in like that time period accurate language or whatever.
Essentially, it just gets dismissed as a dream.
Yeah.
So she's dreaming within a dream.
Yeah, Weingart was like, "Oh, that whole thing, that was a dream." And he's like, "But I'll always be here for you when you wake up." So he's like flipping the situation. And then they make out. So sure.
Yeah. But at that point, there is kind of a flash for Jean of Cyclops' face, and that's what wakes her up in the real world.
Yeah. She wakes up and in the real world. Storm is by her bedside, and Jean asks Storm for a glass of water, and Storm, in all her infinite wisdom, thinks it's a good idea to leave her alone as she wakes up in a cold sweat from a nightmare.
Storm could also summon a tiny cloud.
That's what I was thinking.
And just always have a glass ready, and you get the freshest water.
Or just straight into your mouth.
No, that's weird, Rod. She has control of like Storm. She doesn't have control of water shit. Yeah. This is not D&D where you can shape water and get your shit together. Yeah. Get your powers straightened out.
Okay. So Storm leaves. We cut over to the Circle Club. Weingart's upset because he's like, it wasn't enough. Emma Frost is like...
Also kind of blames Emma, like, you didn't amplify it enough.
Yeah, and Emma's like, this is a very delicate matter, and she figured out that Jean and Scott have a psychic rapport.
Yeah, that the rapport intruded on Jean's mind, and it was actually Jean's mind seeking protection because it knew something wasn't right.
Oh yeah. Oh, so that was I'm just putting this together now. That's why the Flash of Scott stopped everything.
Yeah, it was her own. The way I interpret it was Jean's own mental defenses that reconnected with Scott, even if Scott wasn't aware of it. That's what snapped her out of it. And I read that as that was Jean. That was not the Phoenix. That was Jean to me.
Yeah, totally. And so Emma and Weingard physically leave. We have to clarify that. Physically leave the Circle Club. At the X Mansion, Storm comes back to find a burnt bed and a broken window. And Storm's like, that's a broken window that I didn't make.
A lot of people have broken windows at the X Mansion. Yeah. Storm isn't the only one.
Not just X Mansion. Storm, it feels like whenever she needs to leave, she's like, there's a door or I can fly out that window.
Okay. Yes, no disagreement. But it still wasn't as egregious as the Archangel episode where he literally grabs a skylight and instead of moving it, he breaks it on the ground on purpose.
I love that.
Warren's such a dick.
Right. And so Storm's like, oh, maybe leaving wasn't such a good idea.
I wish she said that.
Right. So we do catch up with Dark Phoenix.
So we are outside the club. Jean teleports in. And at this point is the first time we see the reveal of the red suit, which is literally the same as the green Phoenix outfit, but all the green has been replaced with red. And that's pretty obvious, like, oh, some shit is about
evil.
to,
And at that moment, Toy Biz was like, yay.
Yes.
Because they could take the same action figure and repaint it, and all of us bought it again.
I don't think I ever had the green one. I think I only had the red one for that.
I think me and my brother got both at some point, and I can't remember if the compromise to our parents was like, well, each of us will have one.
Yeah.
Or something is not buying the same thing over again. We're like, it's totally different, Mom. You don't get it.
But at least she is aware. She can't go into a club dressed like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be clubs where that would have worked, especially close to the inner circle club. But instead of going in like pseudo spandex bondage gear, she transfers over to street clothes.
Yeah, and she's confused why she's there. She wanders into the club and she sees a little bit of Dazzler's show. So, little side note: Dazzler's singing at that point.
Song number two, which the first one seemed like a song that we caught a glimpse of. This one was supposed to be a glimpse of a song, but like the music and the lady singing are two different keys, like so they don't match. I don't know what happened in this time period, but like I am just imagining what probably happened was the voice actor didn't have music and they're like sing something that sounds like the end of a song. She sang something and then whoever did the music took like some stock music, someone did something and just laid it underneath. What stood out to me is if you look at Dazzler and all the different versions of her, the voice of the character does not match what I always had in my mind for how that character would sound. And that could just be me, but it was very throaty, which didn't feel like that pop vibe, from a former Disco Queen style character.
Like the first song sounded more
The
like
first
that.
song did, but when she was actually speaking, there was a disconnect for me of the spoken voice versus the song. The song was closer to what I pictured Dazzler sounding like, at least in my own head.
And then the second song, she's this weird, like, once again, this might have just been bad direction at the time or something, but she's like, like, and tried to end like that. And I was like, all right, everybody still applauded, whatever.
While we talk shit about Dazzler's voice, so Dazzler wraps up the song, she sees Scott in the audience, and then runs down and just goes in for the kiss, which, I mean, props to her. She's going to shoot her shot.
Yeah. So Scott, presumably, we don't see his expression, is surprised that Dazzler laid one on him. And because this is the 90s and timing always works out like this.
Everybody sees it.
Yeah. Everybody sees it. Jean happens to walk in the very moment it happens and, kind of freaks out. It cuts to right outside the club. Emma Frost and Weingard have just arrived. And Emma's like, I sense that Jean's mood has changed suddenly.
Yes. Yes, it did.
So back inside the club, Scott freezes up. He's like, oh, hey, Jean. And then Emma and Weingard walk in right in time, and Weingard makes the illusion happen for Jean again.
Yeah.
And so Jean goes to make out with Weingard, and Scott is seeing the non-illusion of Jean making out with Weingard.
And you also get the wonderful moments from Dazzler of like, oh, there's always a girlfriend. And then she sees the kiss and she's like, oh, the ex-girlfriend. And like, I literally laughed out loud on that one. Like, that was such a great, like, I've worked in bars and nightclubs and I've seen that kind of drama unravel. It nailed that vibe perfectly. I did love that.
I love Dazzler. Yeah, you could tell that she's a she's a touring musician, like, you know, and like you said, she's from like New York bars and clubs and stuff.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Scott's upset, which kind of cracks me up because I know that he didn't mean for Dazzler to make out with him, but then he got his feelings hurt because Jean was making out with somebody. And so he's kind of upset. He's like, something's wrong. It's like, yeah, so, you know, you have an inexplicable situation, so she can too.
I think for Scott, it's, again, he's just a ignorant doofus when it comes to social interaction. Him and Luther from Umbrella Academy don't know how to interact with real human beings.
Yes.
I've come to, they are the same character, and that's why they're both essentially number ones for their professor, because they follow orders like good soldiers, and then when they have to do anything else, they're just freaking idiots. But as that happens, the Circle Club guards attack again, and you get like a save moment from Dazzler, who's just like, well, yep, go save your chick, I guess.
Cut to the Circle Club. The main team has figured their shit out. They're all there. Outside.
All of them except for Jubilee.
Yes.
Oh,
I forgot. Jubilee's not in this, which makes sense because this is a lot for a teenage girl to have to take in.
I mean, we get the double check of like, they're asking like, you know, how can you be sure that this is where it is to Wolverine? And Wolverine gives like the jab. He's like, well, I don't make mistakes when it comes to Jean, because he smelled that this was where the trail led. And that leads to, you know, the double check of, well, Xavier couldn't track her mind.
Storm makes the comment once again.
I literally, like, I wrote Storm quote because I knew Rod was going to want to say this because he loves the great Storm quotes.
So to play off of Cyclops' like ignorance, Storm kind of says what I'm going to guess everybody else knew. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. And we don't really get an answer to that.
So Wolverine says, well, we don't really have invitations to get in there, because they could tell it's kind of like high society private club.
And they would stand out if they just try to walk in.
You'd think?
Yeah. And Scott says, well, we can't break in because that, you know, it would kind of blow their cover and everything. So he sends Rogue.
So they all stand outside in the middle of the street.
It's that logic. If we don't move.
Because a place like the Inner Circle would not have guards outside.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that.
Which they didn't.
So. Yeah, so Scott sends Rogue to go spy in to see if there's any like weak points they can break into. Rogue flies over the building, looks in through a skylight, and sees a wedding in progress between Jean and Weingard.
Right, and we see that it is happening in both the real world and also in Jean's mind, where it's like the
pirate.
Like colonial time style wedding. Like, okay, cool, you just got to America and you got hitched already?
Yeah.
Cool.
And Rogue doesn't even go back to report. She just like breaks the skylight and goes into
this show fucking hates skylights.
Yeah,
dude.
skylights. But also, this is like a minor kind of observation, is that the urgency and importance of weddings in not only the show but this time period and stuff is they're like, oh, this ceremony is the thing we need to stop because it's like bound by whatever laws of nature and stuff. So like Rogue is like, we have to stop this wedding and not get the team to come in and take. So she's trying to shake Jean out of like this trance so that she doesn't like
say yes.
Well, they completed their vows, but they just didn't kiss yet. So I guess that was like the
that
point.
is the legally binding moment.
And so the X-Men take the Rogue breaking in as their sign to like, you know what?
Glass shatters and you assume it's Rogue. Yeah.
So they break in.
Yeah.
This is funny.
Storm tornadoes everybody up to the roof and then drops them all in. And then we get the big fight moment.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things we learn, or like I learned, especially because I didn't know a lot about these characters. Shaw's power is absorbing energy.
Yeah. It's kinetic energy. Mm-hmm. So it's not dissimilar from Bishop, where Bishop is absorbing like blasts and stuff like that and able to shoot them back. Instead, the more you punch Sebastian Shaw, the stronger his punch to you is going to be. And also your punches are not taking him down.
Yeah. And I have to say, in this fight, we're seeing more and more they're better as a team than ever.
Yeah, the X-Men are definitely using teamwork, and you know, maybe a little bit of that is related to the X Factor episode, where it's like you divide and conquer and know who your opponents are to keep them on edge kind of scenario.
We'll give them this credit. Whenever they get their ass handed to them, they don't usually make that same exact mistake again. They make brand new ones next time.
All right. Pierce proves yet again that he is just trash at fighting. Wolverine slashes his arm, which, dude, he just needs outfits that don't have sleeves. Can we just agree on that? Like, it's not paying off for him. And then Storm zaps him.
Yeah. And Leland, and this power makes more sense now, blows Wolverine through, well, he doesn't blow Wolverine through several floors down, but he makes Wolverine, I guess, dense enough so Wolverine gets like blown several floors down into the sewer.
Yeah, I mean, you already have Wolverine who's built like a brick shithouse, filled with adamantium, and then you made that even denser. So he literally just makes him so heavy, he drops through 3 floors, and it's the momentum that carries him down into the sewer.
And I didn't think about this. Now that I know that he has density powers, that's his like kind of X-Man way, not X-Man, like mutant way of putting concrete on someone's feet.
Yeah.
Right? Like the mob thing and stuff.
Right.
That makes so much more sense now than just blasting through. Because before I was like, why do you think he was dead? He's Wolverine. He's like, oh, because he literally thought he like permanently put him underwater.
Yeah, he made him so heavy he shouldn't be able to get back up.
Gotcha. So Cyclops charges Shaw and gets blasted away because I guess he didn't get the memo from the earlier
right. And now you know that it's not a laser beam, but a concussion beam. So it's more of a kinetic style blast that's actually hitting him.
And so they, to more credit to their teamwork, Storm freezes him because that's not a kinetic energy thing.
Yeah. It's actually the opposite because from a scientific standpoint, and just to be crystal clear, in case you weren't sure, Rod and I, not scientists, but cold causes kinetic energy to slow because it's stopping the molecules from whacking each other as frequently.
And so that's
the scientific term, is molecules whacking each other. Yeah.
So sexy. Anyway, so that does stop him. But then
stopped me.
But then Jean blasts Storm, and Storm is just thrown aback because I guess it would throw you, for a loop, even if you know that this, your friend is troubled, just to see them like attack you, like literally personally attack you.
Well, because at this point they don't have an understanding of this power's control over her. And basically, like, this is the moment where we get the big reveal.
And so Storm says, "Jean, how could you?" And Phoenix says, "It's not Jean, just Phoenix.
It's not Jean, only her body, only her delicious senses. I am Phoenix."
So Storm and Phoenix, they could be in that little, like, they were in theater club together.
Yeah, they could write some shit together.
And then she makes out with Winecart just to throw some salt on the wound and calls him her husband.
And then to be continued.
We're watching a soap opera. You have to acknowledge that.
Oh, it's 100% a soap opera. Yeah. So that was the first episode of this multi-parter, but it was a heavy one, man. I loved it because you had them fighting a different kind of enemy in this point. So on one side, obviously, like, you have what's going on with Jean, but on the other side, it is a group of mutants who are in power,
like in the shadows,
and it's a shadow organization. They are not there hiding. They're consolidating, and that's a very different thing. And it's like, oh, there was this whole thing that was happening that we had no idea about, which, again, kind of like tossing back to that X Factor appearance episode, that just means that as much as Xavier and Scott and the team think they know what's going on, they really don't.
Yeah. And other people are literally watching. Like, Emma Frost's character is genuinely terrifying in this children's cartoon.
The level of control that Emma Frost has is absurd. And she's such a cool character. I'm sad we only get the evil version of Emma in this series, because towing the line of being a good guy is also an incredible story for Emma. But that's kind of the wrap up of it. The only note that I had that we didn't cover throughout the course of the episode is, in the show, they go for, very powerful mutants to be a part of it. In the comic, it was a little more of like control over random mutants, and then they discover Jean. So Dazzler, I think that is kind of the illusion of like, well, were you picking her up because you actually thought she should be in our circle, or were you just going for it yourself? I think that was that way of covering it from a story beat perspective.
Gotcha. Yeah, that and the thing you mentioned about it supposedly being Jean and Weingart's like ancestors.
Yeah, I mean, that, like I said, I think it's a cool moment in the comics, but it's also, you're looking at 10 issues of a comic. Really, the story is focused around 4 issues in the comic, but it's still lots of stuff from multiple issues are getting included in here.
Yeah, so like you said, not much more. We said a lot, Ed, so there's not much more to say about it, but it's really cool, and it's a really good separation of episodes story-wise.
Obviously, next 3 weeks of the show are going to be more Dark Phoenix episodes.
Thanks for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them in the comments for either the YouTube upload or official Instagram post about this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox.
It's still there, I swear.
Yeah.